Anybody who wishes to have a sign-up sheet for House Bill 902, yeah, it's going to be right over here. And if you would come around, you can come around even while we're doing 676 and sign over here in the corner, if you hadn't already. Let me get my glasses on. Huh? 902 is a hearing only? Yep. After we get through with 676. Okay, I'll recognize you to make a motion. Because what I'll say is, there's a bill on the table or any motions, and then you would make that we take it off the table. There's a second. Oh, voting on 676 and a hearing on 902. Well, we're getting ahead of ourselves on that. No, hey, look, there's no plan. No plan. Okay, I know everybody's got a lot of business, and we have a quorum. Preacher, would you say our prayer before we get started? No, I'm sorry.
There we go. Let's pray. Father, we come to you at the close of a long and hectic day. We just pray that you would continue to bless us, and Lord, help us to pay attention to what we're doing and do the right thing. In Christ's name, amen.
Thank you, Preacher. We'll go right into, and I believe, we'll call that a yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, the House substitute to HB 676 was tabled. At this point, is there there's a bill on the table? Are there any motions for that bill?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chairman.
State your motion.
I move that House Bill 676 be taken off the table and back to the before the committee.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, and there's no debate on taking the bill off the table, so we don't even have to. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. Okay, House substitute, committee substitute, House Bill 676 is now off the table. That's fine. We recognize the author, Ms. Rakestraw. Now what we'll do at this point, since we just took that bill off the table, the bill has been explained. I will ask at this point, are there any further questions from the committee on House Bill 76? We've moved it off the table. Are there any further questions for the author? I see no questions, so now would be the proper time to make a motion concerning House Bill, the committee substitute House Bill 676.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to pass House Bill 676.
There's a motion to pass, and I hear a second. Now, is there any further discussion on that motion? I hear no further discussion. Those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign. There are none. The bill is passed. Thank you, Ms. Redstraw. And thank the committee. Okay, at this point, we have a hearing on the committee substitute to House Bill 902. Now again, a hearing only, and the way our hearings operate is we're going to have Chairman Earhart present his bill. At that point, the committee members can ask him whatever questions they want about that. Then we will have testimony from whoever signed up, and we have the list here. And then we'll have Chairman Earhart, if he wishes, to close out with comments on that. So at this point, I recognize Chairman Earhart to explain his substitute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the courtesy and look forward to not taking too much of your time, because I know there's a lot of people that would like to talk to the committee about this particular legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, this came about as a result of the audit report that the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts, all of us know we get a lot of these, and they spend a lot of time and effort on these audits, and I've yet to find one that wasn't necessarily compelling. And as a result of that report, I received communications from the Georgia House of Representatives House Budget Office. And many of us know the director of that, Martha Wigton, and they're always searching for efficiencies in the budgeting of the state. So with those two groups, I agreed to begin this conversation. Now, I'll state right up front that there's probably, of the 30 years I've been here, probably 28 of them I've spent in adversarial conversations at times with my friends in the Industrial Lending Association. And I use the term friends, not prospectively, but clearly. We've developed an interesting competition over the years with respect to a lot of this. So none of this is ever personal. There won't be any comments about Gila monsters in this particular debate. But in this sense, we're not talking about turf or market share or anything with respect to the ability to prosecute their business. We're talking about which department regulates this and what's most efficient. And I'll read to you directly from the audit report. There are multiple reasons to transfer responsibility for the industrial loan program to the Department of Banking and Finance. Just anecdotally, I've worked, and the Legislative Council mostly has worked with the department very, very closely on this particular piece of legislation that you have in front of you. These reasons include industrial loan program fits within DBF's mission and purpose. 12 other states that were surveyed regulate their industrial loans through their banking and finance. Staff in the industrial loan program and DBF's non-depository financial institution division perform similar regulatory functions. As you know, it's currently under the insurance department. I'm not saying they've done a bad job or anything else, but this audit is fairly compelling. I direct your attention to it. DBF Technologies could prove the efficiency of the small loan regulation. And by combining examinations, DBF could potentially increase the efficiency of the small loan examination. Those are hard premises to argue with. Mr. Chairman, I'll go through as quickly as I can. It's a fairly lengthy bill. I'm not going to do line by line or anything and subject
Take
anyone.
your time. We're here to hear what you want to say.
Anyone to that. But just in summary, 902 replaces the Georgia Industrial Loan Act with the Small Consumer Finance Loan Act, just a name change. It transfers the administrative oversight of small loans from the Department of Insurance to the Department of Banking and Finance to align duties, personnel, supplies, records, rules, orders, actions, regulations, property, funds, receivables, and obligations. Legislation revises and provides new definitions for control, covered employee, department, executive officer. The bond requirement to cover claims associated with a licensee's small consumer loan is $25,000 per location for up to 3 locations, $10,000 for the 4th and 5th location, and $5,000 for any location thereafter. The bond is conditioned on the licensee's payment of any noncompliance damages either to the claimant or the creditor. The bill adds a new code section that authorizes the department to expand its participation in, and this is important, the nationwide multi-state licensing system and registry to include electronic processes such as licensing and collections for small loans. It allows the department to enact rules for a process to allow licensees to request an adjustment to information entered into by the department into the registry. The bill establishes detailed procedures for the department to investigate and examine applicants and licensees for issuing cease and desist orders and for suspension and revocation of licenses. it requires, and this again is important, licensees to maintain GCIC criminal history records on covered employees, submit certain information to the registry, and maintain records available for department examination for at least 5 years. These are basic standards that any other financial institution that makes any type of loan in the state of Georgia has to go through. A licensee shall provide notice to the department of any small consumer finance loan related action filed against it. And the bill also adds a new code section to allow a person to become the ultimate equitable owner or executive officer. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, again, with all of the verbiage, with all of the basic description, this effectively just moves the people in the insurance department who are doing this to the Department of Banking and Finance, who are better suited and better able, have more processes, have more experience, and have the capacity to create efficiencies and the type of oversight needed in these types of small loans. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll cease what I have to say and be glad to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there any questions for Chairman Earhart in his presentation? Representative Donahue.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, let me ask a question. Do you have the fiscal note of the cost of moving this over?
There is no fiscal note required because it's the same budget for the insurance department as would be required for the Department of Banking and Finance. I've checked that with Director Martha Wigton. She did that. Actually, the efficiencies created by this transfer would be budget positive in the end.
Okay. So basically, a couple years down the road, we will not be coming back and asking for increase in the budget because of moving over a company that makes $3,000 loans. The average loans are $350 to $750. I'm really not sure the banking industry really wants to take over something like that, but apparently.
Well, we've been working with them pretty closely on that.
Right.
And they sell car clubs and insurance products too. Maybe that adds to the $750.
Then let me ask you this. There's one thing looking through, and it is a lengthy bill. How come we pretty much are singling out the Georgia Industrial or Installment Loan Association, but we've allowed pawn brokers and people, title pawn, to do the same thing, but we have them struck from this bill. They're not under the same rules and regulations that we would pretty much want to put GILA under. Is there a reason for that, or maybe I read it 16 times and missed that part? Or
Rep. Donahue, I was looking through the Georgia Department of Audits and Accounts and Performance Audit Division, and I don't see anything with respect to those entities under this legislation. There's a germaneness test for most legislation, as you understand.
Yes.
And they're regulated differently. I have a great deal of respect for the Department of Audits and Accounts and their recommendations. I also have tremendous respect for Director Wigton and the House Budget Office, who has a lot to do with what we do appropriate and all the requests that all of us make. So I'm going to, rather than worry about who wasn't a part of this bill because it wouldn't be germane in the first place, I'm going to take the recommendation of those individuals who and run with it.
okay, and fair enough. If I may, let me ask you a couple of things here with, why we didn't include them. I still don't really understand, but pretty much we are also removing convenience and advantage language above by striking this language in the effect, making it a de facto deregulation of installment lending in Georgia and will dilute the prohibition of payoff loans. With that, I was going to ask you on above there, line 259, if you'll look at that, it removes no more than one place of business that shall be maintained under the same license, and you'll follow that in line 419. If you just look at those two and just kind of explain a little bit there. 259.
Advantage of the community in which the licensed office is to be located. That's a subordinate clause after the conjunction and. What would you like me to explain about what that says?
Just basically it removes the convenience and advantage in that line. No more than one place of business shall be maintained under the same license.
Help me, Representative Donahue. I don't see the words convenience and advantage
I'm
in
sorry?
line 259.
No, I'm just 419, and like I said, I've had a ton of bills today also, and just a couple of things I'd marked through. 419, no more than one place of business shall be maintained under the same license. Is there a reason? Let's say I own 12 convenience stores, and if I have 7 or 12 of the same industrial loan buildings or a loan building, now I'm going to have a license for each one.
We've always regulated financial institutions differently than 7-Eleven. I suspect that that's probably a public good argument, that we could say that there's a big difference in a loan purveyor and a Slurpee purveyor, and I'm going to go with a little bit of public good on the financial side.
Yes, sir. Let's see if somebody else wants to ask a question. I'll let them go from there, and then I'll come back.
Thank you, Representative Donahue. Does anybody else have any questions for Chairman Earhart, for the committee? Looks like that's all the questions for the committee, Chairman
Thank you,
Earhart.
Mr. Chairman. I'm appreciative. I'll be glad to come back after we hear from
Absolutely. Okay, first on the list of witnesses I have, drum roll, please. Kat Middleton, there you are. Repeat your name and tell the committee who you're with.
Sure.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Kat Middleton, and I represent the Department of Insurance. Thank you for the opportunity to express the department's opposition to this bill, which would essentially transfer the regulation of the Georgia Industrial Loan Act to the Department of Banking and Finance. The GILA Loan Act has been with the Department of Insurance for over 60 years, and we've enforced the provisions of that law rigorously. This bill would not reduce the budget and would not create any kind of saving for taxpayers. That being said, the department asks that you please oppose this bill. If you have any questions, I can try to answer them.
No questions.
No questions.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Clevenger. No.
Thank you. I'm here on behalf of the Georgia Financial Services Association. Personally, to give context, I am employed with First Franklin Financial Corporation. They've been in business in the state of Georgia since 1941. We currently have about 119 offices in the state. We do both GILA-regulated loans as well as larger loans in the state. We also operate in six total states, including Georgia. The Georgia Financial Services Association does not have an official position on this bill. They're still processing and looking at it. However, we do believe that the current system does work well, that GILA is responsive both to our needs and the needs of the public. We think that they have been responsive and efficient in modernizing as technology and other changes have occurred throughout the state. However, having said that, we also find this bill to be acceptable and don't find any opposition to the bill as well. The one thing we would ask the committee to consider is a clarification or a grandfathering, if you will, of a period of time for those entities who have already paid their licenses in the last 6 months, say, and making this bill effective on July 1 and not having to impartially, because most of the licensures that we go through aren't on a 12-month calendar, and if the committee would consider that one-time grandfathering, that would be something that the Financial Service Association would appreciate.
I hadn't thought of that. Okay, all right, sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Dan Jeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dan Jeter, and I'm an officer in the Georgia Installment Lenders Association. It's my pleasure to come before you, and I appreciate the committee members' consideration giving us an opportunity to present. Personally, my brother and I are in the consumer finance business with a company that our father started in 1949, actually before there was an Industrial Loan Act. And we're about ready to celebrate our 70th anniversary in a couple of in 1 year, and we hope that that continues in this environment as we've got a third generation in our family that's going to come to work in the business also. So it's been a great opportunity to serve the people of Georgia making small consumer loans. We've got about 14,000 customers that take advantage of the services that we provide, and I think that we do a good job of trying to do that. Through the years, we have been regulated by the Georgia Industrial Loan Act and the Office of Commissioner of Insurance. I'd say it appears that everything sprung out of that Department of Audit's study that was done, and there were some frequently asked questions that were prepared and presented by the Department of Banking and Finance, and I'll just real briefly hit a couple of those points. Banking and Finance says that they regulate 200 banks and about 17,000 licensees. They're going to get another 1,000 offices approximately to regulate, and probably about 4,500 employees, many of which have different licenses that they will have to regulate. So I would actually be concerned about the funding necessary to effectively manage this extra burden that's going to be on the Department of Banking and Finance if this takes place. In our talking points, we said that the consumer loan is a unique product. The fact is, in Moultrie, one community bank has stopped making installment loans altogether. So while the Department of Banking and Finance does indeed have community banks, has credit unions that do make small industrial loans or consumer loans, that's a changing market that's taking place. But what I would say is that we indeed have a unique customer, and that customer requires special needs, attentions, and understanding. So there is a difference between a bank customer and an installment loan customer. A particular issue to me, since the Act was formed in 1955, examination has been a key ingredient. We're used to being examined every 6 months in our office. Right now, I think the bill says that we should be examined every 24 months. To be honest, I like regulation. I like seeing that examiner come in our office and question our managers, look over our books, our records, et cetera. I'd be concerned about taking that backwards, personally. A question came up about multiple products and multiple regulation, and also said that Georgia was an outlier in terms of the regulation. You know, we are an outlier to an extent. Alabama's got 3 different regulators that regulate small loans, check cashing, money service business type activities. Whatever happens, we need to be under one regulator, whether it be Department of Banking and Finance or Office of Consumer Commissioner of Insurance. I think that's the most effective way in which to have this take place. The one response of the frequently asked questions that failed to address some of the talking points that our association came up with did have to do with licensing. And at present, an application is submitted if you want a new loan license, examination occurs, and if it's determined that the public good will be served by the issuance of a license, the license approved. That's what everybody wants to refer to as convenience and advantage. And I'm going to give y'all one quick example of why convenience and advantage is important in my mind. If you just look at me, I'm 245 pounds. If you put me in a sweet shop, I don't have the discipline to not eat every bit of candy in there and sample every bit of candy. I'd leave there at 295 pounds. In a small rural community especially, if you've got a finance company, a title pawn agency, whatever the case, on every store corner. There are an awful lot of people that don't have the discipline in which to not take advantage of that and try to borrow money. The need may come up, the desire may come up, they're going to get themselves in debt. Does it hurt the lender? Yeah, it does, but who else does it hurt? It hurts the consumer first and foremost, and that's who I'm concerned about. It hurts the other businessmen in town if bankruptcy follows. Too much credit needs to be a regulated industry in the state of Georgia, in my opinion, plain and simple. That addresses the frequently asked questions. There's one thing that the change from OCI to DBF would entail that, quite frankly, I like the electoral process. I like the ability to cast a vote for the person that's going to regulate me. If we go to an appointed body, then I'm going to lose that opportunity to cast the vote for the person that really has an influence on my life and my livelihood. So that's just a simple fact for me, and it may be unique to my viewpoint there. There are going to be additional costs that are going to be occurred that we're going to have to absorb, whether it be surety bonds, whether it be additional things on hiring. Exam costs right now are part of the budget of OCI, as they are part of the budget of DBF, but it looks like those exam costs are going to transfer over to us, and so that's a situation that is going to increase my cost of doing business. Just in a simple closing, I've got two quotes. Brian thought I only had one. I've got two quotes from Winston Churchill now. Winston Churchill said, "However beautiful the strategy, you must occasionally look at the results." I can tell you for 62 years, what has happened in Georgia has worked well. The public has been protected and lending has been regulated. The other thing that Winston Churchill said, life is fraught with opportunities to keep your mouth shut. And so I'm going to do that at this point unless there are any questions. Thank y'all.
Thank you, Mr. Jeter, and I will say you do have the distinction after 8 years of my chair in this committee of asking for more regulations and more examinations. That's been unique, but thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Thank you. I know you came a ways. Liz Coyle is our next witness.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Coyle, Executive Director of Georgia Watch. We're a statewide consumer advocacy organization. I know it's already been a long day, so I'll be brief, but I wanted to speak in support, very strong support of this legislation. We agree with Representative Earhart that the findings of the audit should be taken into consideration and that their recommendations should be followed. Much of what is recommended is just common sense. The DBF is well positioned to take over regulating, and we believe should be regulating all aspects of lending in Georgia. The fact that there would be efficiencies, good impact on the budget, save some taxpayer money, we certainly support that. Representative, you asked about, well, why isn't title pawn regulated here? And we just heard from the gentleman who's also opining on that question. We certainly agree with Representative Earhart that currently that's in a completely different section of the code. So as part of this move, it wouldn't make sense. We absolutely endorse the bill as submitted, but would encourage this body to then consider maybe in a future year, in a future round of looking at ways to better regulate the full lending industry, to consider moving the title pawn industry under the Small Dollar Loan Act. Any questions?
Well, we don't questions. You're that.
Oh, no. Okay.
No question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Is there anyone else in the audience? That's the last of the sign-up sheet. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the bill? Chairman Earhart, would you like to? You can wrap up our hearing with your closing remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I appreciate the testimony. It's always instructive, and I just a couple points with respect to the Georgia Financial Services Association recommendation to grandfathering and calendar. That's an excellent suggestion. Those are easy fixes. Those are the kind of things that we should do, and that's why we have a committee process, and that's not difficult in this piece of legislation. To my friend the Jeters, and we've had a long history, and a wonderful guy. I'd say this is moving, not deregulation. So it does meet the definition of where he wanted to go with that. It's not a deregulation of the industry by any stretch. Two, talking about some of the fees, one of the few businesses where taxpayers pay the business's fees are in this particular code section. And I'd say that every business ought to be treated fairly with respect to how fees are paid. I'd certainly like a state agency to pay the fees for some of the businesses I've had. I can pay my business license too, but we don't get to do that. So I'd give you that for your consideration. Third, we generally don't elect financial services regulators, and there's good reasons for that. Just think about that for a minute, why you don't necessarily want to elect it doesn't happen with the FDIC, it doesn't happen with the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, and it doesn't happen with the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance. And fourth, and I'll finish with this, Churchill said a lot of things. He's one of my favorites. And one of the favorite things he ever said was, never, 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 and he said it 17 times, never give up and never give in. And after 30 years, I'm still not giving up or giving in. So we'll continue this discussion with respect to the regulation of this industry and the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Earhart. And with that, unless there is other business that committee members have, then we will call this hearing adjourned.